She grabbed my hand and whispered, "Please, pretend you know me." The woman grabbed my hand so suddenly that I almost dropped the folder I was carrying. Her fingers were trembling, her face was wet with tears, and there was a kind of fear in her eyes I had never seen before. She leaned closer and whispered that if I cared about what happened to her, I had to pretend I knew her until someone walked away. I had no idea who she was, why she had chosen me, or what danger was waiting outside the hospital doors. But within the next hour, I would discover that sometimes a stranger doesn't enter your life by accident. Sometimes they arrive because you are the only person standing between them and losing everything. I had been working at the hospital for nearly 6 years, mostly handling administrative work while trying to finish my medical training. It wasn't glamorous, and most days I went home exhausted, but I had learned something important there: people rarely told you the whole truth when they were afraid. That afternoon, the waiting room was unusually crowded. Nurses hurried through the corridors, families whispered near the vending machines, and the smell of disinfectant filled the air. I was walking toward the records department when the woman suddenly appeared in front of me. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her coat was wrinkled, her hair was messy, and tears had already begun falling down her cheeks. She caught my hand and asked me to stay beside her for just a few minutes. I could hear the desperation in her voice, and despite every instinct telling me not to get involved, I couldn't walk away. If you believe that kindness can change someone's life, please take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes the smallest act of courage becomes the beginning of someone's second chance. I guided her toward a quieter section of the waiting room. She kept looking over her shoulder as if she expected someone to appear. I asked whether she needed security or medical help, but she shook her head. Eventually, she told me that her younger brother was inside the hospital recovering from a serious accident. Their family had been struggling financially for months, and after their parents died, she had become responsible for everything. She had discovered that someone was trying to force her to sign documents that would give away her brother's legal inheritance. She had refused, and since then, she had been followed several times. She didn't know whom she could trust anymore. I didn't know whether every detail was true, but I knew one thing: she was genuinely frightened. I asked her brother's name and checked the hospital records. Everything matched. He was indeed a patient, and she was listed as his emergency contact. That changed everything. This wasn't some random story invented by a stranger. Then I noticed a man standing near the entrance. He wasn't doing anything suspicious. He wasn't shouting or threatening anyone. He simply stood there watching the waiting room. But the moment the woman saw him, her entire body stiffened. She lowered her head and moved closer to me. I realized why she had grabbed my hand. She wasn't asking me to become something I wasn't. She was asking me to help her feel less alone. I walked with her toward the nurse's station and quietly explained the situation to hospital security. The staff immediately became more alert. The man near the entrance eventually left without approaching us, but the fear on the woman's face didn't disappear. For the next several hours, I stayed nearby while the hospital's social worker contacted the appropriate authorities. We learned that the woman had been receiving threatening messages for weeks. Her brother's accident had happened during a period when their family's financial dispute was becoming more complicated. She had been trying to protect him while barely holding herself together. What struck me most wasn't the legal situation. It was how tired she looked. She wasn't crying because she wanted sympathy. She was crying because she had spent too long pretending she was strong. Late that evening, her brother finally woke up. The nurse came to tell her that his condition had stabilized. The woman covered her face with both hands and began crying again, but this time the tears were different. They were tears of relief. I stepped away to give her privacy. A few minutes later, she found me in the hallway. She thanked me for staying. I told her I hadn't done anything extraordinary. She disagreed. She said that when everyone else had told her to be careful, I had been the first person to simply ask whether she was okay. That sentence stayed with me. Because I realized how often we assume people need solutions when sometimes they first need someone to believe that their fear is real. Over the following weeks, the hospital's social worker helped her find legal assistance and temporary housing. The investigation continued, and the people attempting to pressure her were eventually identified. Her brother slowly recovered. There were still difficult days, but she no longer faced them completely alone. One morning, several months later, I saw her sitting in the same hospital waiting room. But this time she wasn't crying. Her brother was beside her, walking with a small support cane. She looked healthier, calmer, and almost unrecognizable from the frightened woman I had met that afternoon. She had come to thank the nurses who had cared for her brother. Before leaving, she approached me and placed a small folded piece of paper in my hand. Inside were only a few words. She wrote that she had once believed asking for help was a sign of weakness. Now she understood that sometimes asking for help was the bravest thing a person could do. I kept that note. Years have passed since that day, but I still think about her whenever I see someone sitting alone in a hospital hallway. We never know what someone is carrying behind tired eyes. We don't know how many battles they have fought before they finally ask for help. And sometimes, helping doesn't require money, power, or special skills. Sometimes it means staying. Sometimes it means listening. Sometimes it means telling a frightened stranger, without judgment, that they don't have to face the next few minutes alone. If this story touched your heart, please support the video with a like, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe. Your small action can help stories like this reach someone who needs a little hope today. And before the story ends, I have one special request. Comment, "I will stay," if you believe that sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is simply refusing to walk away when they are afraid. Because we may never know exactly what that woman would have done that day if nobody had stopped to listen. But I know what happened when one person finally did. She walked into that hospital believing she had no one left. She walked out knowing that there were still good people in the world. And sometimes, that's enough to help someone begin again.